when we think about postpartum, we think about depression. That's the number one thought that comes into our mind because we are seeing so many women suffer from this. And we have some really old statistics that say 1 in 7 women experience postpartum depression. During COVID, those numbers were 1 in 3. And we haven't done any science or studies or look at depression rates since COVID. But we do know that those numbers are growing exponentially. 1 in 3 women will experience some form of mental health disorder during this time. It is the number one issue that we experience. The number one complication of childbirth is mental health disorder and postpartum. And so we have to ask the question, what in the world is going on here? Because what we see, what's transpiring, this massive growth, this epidemic, it's growing at epidemic proportions. What's happening is not working. And we need to do something better for this.
Okay, so really, when we talk about the postpartum crisis, you referenced the mental health crisis postpartum quite a bit. What is that? Where does that come from? Is it just a natural consequence of giving birth and going through that physical trauma, the emotional trauma, right, of your entire life transforming? Now, all of a sudden, your identity revolves around this baby, or is there more to it?
There's so much more to it. And I think society right now really truly believes, and we've fed women this lie that postpartum depression is just something that happens after having a baby. We've normalized it because it happens so frequently. And we really need to take a step back and say, wait a second, is this how it's supposed to go? Is this like a biological normal? And that's my background. I specialize in biology and human biology. And that's how I've come into this space after having my own children and really studying this. And no, the answer is no, it's not a biological normal to have postpartum depression, but it is a biological normal to develop postpartum depression when you lack the tools necessary to heal your body. That's a warning sign for your body. It's saying, I'm not getting enough support, enough nutrients, enough regulation in my nervous system, whatever it may mean for you, because I feel like, it's not so simple. It's very complex and convoluted, and there's a lot of pieces that kind of intertwine together. And it's not, well, one size fits all model. And that's what we've been given in postpartum care. We've been given very little in postpartum care, right? How many appointments do we have when we're pregnant to go get checked out, get cared for? We get all of the attention. And then postpartum comes and we have one checkup at 6 weeks.
Right.
And what do they do during that checkup? Here is a little 10 questionnaires. If you're lucky, you might get a couple questionnaires about whether or not you have depression, right? And sometimes you might feel, that those are relatable to you. And oftentimes, for many women that I speak to, this is not relatable. It wasn't relatable for me, even though I had depression and anxiety. And then you're given an all clear, and here's your birth control.
Right.
That's care.
Right.
And that is such a cop out. That's not care. That's not preventative. That's not medicine in the least bit. And so we're getting absolutely nothing. And, when we come back 6 months later, a year later, we're being told, oh, it's just your hormones. Of course you don't feel like yourself. Of course things are a little weird and out of balance. And your mom tells you the same thing. And your best friend says, yeah, no worry. Like, we all deal with it. This is just how motherhood is. And so again, we've normalized it because no one knows how to do any better. And that's the frustrating part.
This brought up so much for me. Obviously, Miranda, I've had 3 kids, you've had 4 kids, and I know that for myself, after following what you teach, which I'm so excited to get into, my post-birth experience was transformed from the first to the second and third after I had met you. But there is so much coming up for me around, I think even going back all the way to like college when I had my first kind of gynecological experiences, right? And just that, like me, I distinctly remember as a college student going to the doctor on campus, right? And just saying like my periods are so painful. They last 7 to 10 days. It's excruciating. It's debilitating. I don't feel like this is normal. I feel like something is wrong. And the only solution offered was birth control. She was like, oh, yeah, it's normal. It takes periods like 10 years to regulate. Let's get you on birth control. You won't have any of those symptoms anymore. And I just remember I went on birth control for 2 months. I absolutely hated it. I blew up. I gained weight. I got cystic acne all along my chin. It was awful. I did not feel good on it. And I was just amazed. Like there were no other, you didn't want to ask about my diet. You didn't want to ask about my sleep habits. You didn't want to ask about my medical history. Like there was nothing else. And to your point, it just doesn't sound like medicine. It doesn't sound like care. So why is the care for women so bad? Like why are we being refused this kind of holistic view of medical care?
Such a good point. And when we look at the data, when we look at the science, we know, for example, that women were excluded from any sort of medical, scientific experiments or anything like that until the 70s. There was a law that actually prevented women from being included in scientific studies as a means of protecting them because, oh, they're of childbearing age, right? And so we were never included in scientific studies. And if you think about it, the birth control contraceptives were created in the 50s, right? And so who were a part of those studies? Like what was done? Was it humans? Not really. There was not a lot of data on that. And thankfully nowadays we actually are starting to study this. We're starting to recognize that oral contraceptives and hormonal contraceptives actually cause a significant amount of damage, and they are not okay for the woman's body in the least bit. We are seeing what it's doing and how it's wreaking havoc. And women are reporting a lot of issues, especially going into menopause. We're starting to recognize, wait a second, this isn't the thing.
Mhm.
But going back to your point, so many providers are not trained in this. And so much science is lacking. They have nothing to train with. There's no data out there that exists currently for a lot of women and a women's healthcare. It's not studied. It wasn't a part of science. And that's true for so many avenues of care. It's not just women's specific things like starting your period or having a period or PCOS or endometriosis, those things that we typically see, or just postpartum in general. Those, of course, are things that have rarely ever been studied. But even more is how does specific medications affect women? If we take an aspirin, what does that do to our bodies? If we are taking Tylenol, what does that do to our bodies? What about our dietary needs? Those actually were done on studies on men
Mhm.
and then reduced to fit that of a woman. So those numbers that were scientifically developed that said, these are the amount of nutrients that you need in a given day to make yourself healthy were all men studies, never done on women. And it was a bunch of men who got together in a room of a panel who made this decision, right? And so women are not being included in not only the scientific studies, but they're not being included in the decisions to have those studies. It's not been important until now. And this is a very exciting time for women because we're finally recognizing, we've got studies coming out about all sorts of things about our brains and how it changes when we give birth and what hormonal birth control does to our bodies. And the fact that so many of our menstrual tools like pads and tampons are actually really toxic for our bodies in the way that they're made and developed. And we're learning all of these things. And these women are saying, yes, I knew that. I've been saying this. I felt that, right? And we're getting back to that and that deeper knowing that we have always had within us and feeling validated in all of that. And I think this is a really fun time, also a very scary time, but we're making change. Change is oftentimes very scary, and there's some big shifts that are quite scary in the healthcare world right now. That we're kind of, it could go one way or another, especially when it comes to women's healthcare. But we are seeing the need for change, and we are seeing women stand up and say, "I deserve better." And we are also seeing providers say, "Wait a second, I wasn't taught this. I wasn't trained with this. This isn't the answer. There's got to be something else out there." And that in itself is very exciting that we as women get to lead this change for our own children, for our own daughters.
100%. So it sounds like really the medical standards that were created for women were really just created for like smaller men,
Oh, 1,000%.
which is so crazy for me to think about considering how much we know now about the significant hormonal differences between men and women. Like that's just nuts.
We have such a different physiology, like within us, and especially in terms of the hormonal patterns and regulations and cyclical living and all of this. And it's mind-boggling to me that we have been labeled just this smaller man when
Right.
we have so much more needs than so many men out there. Just because we're, quote unquote smaller doesn't mean that we need less of anything. And then we look at medicines and how they are used within the body. Like we know that how medication is generally developed. They're usually studied on men, and so we're starting to see that those when we're studying women now because women are saying, wait a second, this is doing something different to my body, or I feel this instead of this. And people are scratching their heads saying, well, what's going on here? And we're recognizing that there's different patterns that a woman's body goes through when it ingests specific medications that is very different than what happens to a man's body.
And
And
when
that in itself is so telling, right? And so we need to bring science back into women's healthcare.
And when you think about how complex the process of growing and birthing a baby, right? And then how a woman's just hormones change after she's had that baby. Can you walk us through a little bit of that, those physiological changes? Like, I think we talk so much about in science, at least in my biology classes, it was how the baby is made, right? And then it's like the embryo and developing into a fetus and how that progresses. But what is happening within the woman's physiology as she's going through each of these stages?
So we know that there's a lot of shifts and changes that happen in pregnancy, and I know a lot about pregnancy, but my expertise is in postpartum. And so after the birth of a baby, when that baby is born, so too is a mother, and her body shifts entirely. And we know that this happens, right? Every woman knows that her body changes, but we don't actually talk about what those changes are, right? We know that you're bleeding and we know that there's leaking and you know that your uterus is returning to its pre-pregnancy state. But we don't talk about how all of the joints and ligaments and bones require 9 to 12 months to return to their pre-pregnancy state, that they shifted so much within you that they take a really long time to get back to where they were. So it's very easy for us in postpartum to actually cause more harm to things like our pelvic floor when we are exercising if we're not doing it right. And unfortunately, there is a right versus a wrong in this scenario, right? Our gut changes significantly, the way we actually digest our foods. And nobody talks about this. This is a huge component of my work. I have an entire certification for providers on this specific shift within the body because how we eat is going to dramatically influence the rest of our healing. And when we don't think about this, when we push it off to the side and we are not given, for myself particularly, I was never told this information. I have 4 kids, never once did a provider or anyone for that matter tell me that, hey, your gut is going to shift dramatically and the way you eat and what you eat is going to be really, really important and play a significant role in how you heal. And therefore, your hormonal regulation, your breast milk production, how it's going to heal your tissues and repair your body overall, the way you feel in terms of your health and well-being and how tired you are, all of that is going to be impacted by what you eat. And that was revolutionary for me and learning about that was actually the very beginning of discovering like all of these changes that occur in the body. We have the nervous system. The nervous system shifts so much in the postpartum body. And it's a beautiful thing that's still being discovered and still being studied as we move into this like new era of understanding women and how their bodies function and work. But what we know is that for one, the brain is changing. The brain is a big part of the nervous system. We have gray matter that changes significantly. Your brain is literally rewiring to be a mother. And so your brain is shrinking and there's new neurological pathways being developed. And this is not some sort of, quote unquote, bad thing that is transpiring. This is an evolutionary process that is so beautiful and so spectacular. It's helping you become the mother in which you can care and support and help your baby thrive.
Mhm.
And that's a gorgeous thing.
Absolutely. Is that where mom brain comes from? Because our
It
brain.
is. It is. It is a real thing, right? It's a real thing. Mom brain happens because our brains are so rewiring. And so the ability to think a linear thought and to be able to remember specific words, that's harder for us to do because that's not where our brain is not thinking in that linear factual way. It's very internal what's happening inside of us. But also when we don't understand those shifts and changes when it comes to our brain and our nervous system. Our nervous system meaning that it's more on high alert. It's helping us seek out danger in our environment in our lives so that we can protect ourselves and protect our babies, right? And when we don't understand that and we don't live in a place that maybe feels safe within ourselves and we don't feel safe within our bodies, whether it be because we had a difficult birth experience, trauma and postpartum is very, very common, trauma and birth, because maybe we have a difficult partner, maybe we live in a place that is not safe. All of those things are very true, but also the very fact that we live in this go, 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 male dominated, you got to get back to work in 2 weeks. You've got to have this all figured out. Your baby, if it's a good baby, should be sleeping. And then we have all of this mom guilt and we have shame and we have resentment and we're not getting the support that we need. And that helps that spiral of, oh my gosh, I'm not safe in my body. And that nervous system goes on overdrive. And then we have things like intrusive thoughts and we have things like depression and anxiety, right? Which is really the perfect storm. The lack of support for our nervous system and our uh, gut function and getting the right nutrients and not having practical support in our bodies are the perfect recipe for postpartum depression. This is what's really occurring. So we might actually have like this clinical name, postpartum depression, but dare I say, postpartum depression is simply a symptom. It's a symptom of not getting our basic human needs met during this sacred time. And of course, our bodies are going to fall apart when we don't have what we need.
Miranda, I think so often we get into, and in particular, I think mom to mom, it's so easy for us to have these conversations about what was missing, what we needed. Oh, I needed my mother-in-law to do my laundry, not hold the baby, right? I needed, my husband to, be with me in the birth process, not on his phone, right? But what does amazing support look like postpartum? Let's paint the picture of the ideal. And I will say, I'm speaking to myself as well as to anyone listening. This may be triggering to hear because our experience was so far off of the ideal. But I think it's so validating to put the ideal out there so that at the very least, we can feel, again, validated in our negative emotions, perhaps about what we didn't experience, right? And recognizing that it is valid, that we wanted more and we didn't get it. But I think also so that we have something to aspire to, not only as, people maybe still in birthing age or years, or people who are wanting to have a baby, but also when we think about our friends and family members who have babies after us, we know how we can be that support system for them. So let's talk about the amazing, ideal postpartum support system.
I love that you brought this up. And I will tell you, I am a high driven A type, go, go, go person. Okay. So I want to throw that out there because when I really dug into the different studies and what would it take to have the most perfect postpartum, what would that look like? Because I wanted to experience that for myself. And it took a lot of rewiring of my own brain before and pregnancy and during pregnancy in order to really appreciate this in postpartum. It was a lot of work for myself because that's not who I've, taken myself to be. But at the same time, I also recognize how much I operate in a state of trauma. And I'll explain that a little bit further here in a moment too. What we know of, let's, quote unquote, the perfect postpartum support. What does that look like? We have a lot of that evidence. We see so much of what that has looked like thanks to past experiences, what other cultures around the world have done for postpartum care that have been lost in recent generations. So when we look at what have people done in the past, there is so many striking similarities between all of these cultures around the world. Um, we call them the cultural truths, right? The cultural postpartum truths. And it's community care is first and foremost. You have people, mothers, aunties, sisters, neighbors, women coming to you in your home. They are not asking questions. They are just getting to work. They're doing dishes, they're folding laundry, they're doing general sweep. They take your kids, go feed them meals, have a picnic, go play with them, take them to the park, put them to bed for nap. So you're not doing that extra work. They're cooking all your meals, right? They just show up and they do. They're not bothering you. They're not saying, "May I hold the baby?" They're not expecting you to serve them a meal or a drink or whatever the case may be, right? We're not expected to have our house clean. It's all done for us. That was what community was. And community care was centered around mother, not baby. Okay. So it was all about what was mom's needs. Somebody would come in and help her breastfeed. Someone would help draw her bath. They would give her herbal drinks and tinctures, right? Herbs are a massive part of traditional care. And same with food. Like that is where everything is centered. Cultural tradition centers around herbal support and whatever herb, you look at Chinese herbs, those are very different than what we see in more Western herbs, but it doesn't matter. It's herbs. Same with food. It doesn't matter what kind of food. Food in general is the center of the conversation. And it's warm, nutrient dense, easy to digest foods, right? They had a rhythm. They had a very pronounced way in which they were doing this and the way in which they were serving these things. And a mother was the center of all of it, everything. Whatever she needed, it was done. And people came to you in your home. So basically, you're like a queen in your castle. It's really how it felt for so many women. You just were there. You could sleep. Somebody could take your baby if that's what you wanted, draw a bath, hold your baby. Like those were the only times that baby was really ever held by someone else. Otherwise, it was you getting to bond with your baby, to nourish your baby, to learn how to breastfeed, whether it's your first time or your 10th time. It's always new, it's always different, right? And to be nourished in this way. And in today's world, it's very challenging because we are all so busy. We're all so overworked. All of us moms are exhausted and burnt. And so the very idea of taking care of ourselves, let alone going to our friend's house who just had a baby, we might understand the significance of that. We might want that so much for our friend or for our sister or even for ourselves. But it's so difficult to manage. It's so hard. And I think that's where we've kind of gotten lost in this. And also, we just have forgotten what it means to give, right? Our grandmothers and great grandmothers were the generations that really started to experience the shift and becoming more independent and not necessarily having this kind of support system. And it was the generations before that really had it. And so our generations have forgotten. And so when they show up in the house, they're like, "Oh, how's baby? Let me hold your baby. This is amazing, baby, baby, baby." And then we forget about moms. But that's not how people really want it to be either. I think, you know, if mom said, "Hey, do you mind doing the dishes before holding the baby?" That person is going to be like, "Yes, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No problem whatsoever." And then they're going to go do the dishes or the laundry or whatever it is that you need. Like it's not a question whatsoever. Like they've just forgot in their brains like how to help. And I think us as women, we have been fed this lie that we have to do it all. That if we ask for support, that somehow we are failing. That if we are not doing it all, then we are not okay,
Mm.
that we are a failure, we're not good enough. And this is something that I deeply struggled with for myself after the first and my second and even my third. I thought that I had to have it all figured out, especially as somebody who is trained in this, who does this work for a living, who had been a doula, who has supported thousands of women in this context and trained providers over and over and over again. How could I not know this? How could I be suffering from this, right? And it's because I thought I should know it all. I should already have this all laid out. And That's where we are. And I will tell you too, to carry on this conversation, again, we're seeing the shift. We're seeing the change in our current culture and this more westernized world. And in a way to deal with this lack and to make up for it, because we understand, wait a second, how we're doing postpartum is not working, and we need to get back to what we knew worked. We've developed things like postpartum retreats. And the idea of it sounds magical. I can go to this facility and I could be like a hotel, right? Somebody else is going to clean up after me. There's no mess all over the house. Like, I'm not going to have to clean the bathroom. I'm not going to have to do laundry or dishes. Somebody's going to come do my nails. Somebody's going to pamper me and give me massages and feed me all the meals. Like, that sounds absolutely delicious, right? To have a lactation consultant on hand, to have like everything that you would possibly need. And the idea of it sounds great, but what I'm seeing is that it's not working. It's not working because it is not in the home. A mother needs to be a queen in her home. That's where the transition really lies, when she is supported in her own space and done in such a way that helps her recognize that what she has is good enough, that she doesn't need some external thing to support her. As silly as it sounds, it's so interconnected into the depths of our soul and our well-being and who we are as women and as now mothers. And it goes very, very deep, and we can have very deep conversations here. We have time, but this is really where it transpires, and we need to do better, and we need to do that for women in their home, not asking them to go elsewhere. Right? I'm writing another book, and I'm very excited about this book. And I was talking about how, we could have all of the specialties. We can have a pelvic floor physical therapist and a counselor and this mom group. And we can have, our OB that we go see and like all of these appointments that we're going to have to get in order to have the best care possible. And how absolutely overwhelming and impossible that is. Could you just, you're a mom, you get it, right? Having if it was your second or your third, you have an infant, then you have a toddlers to go to these appointments, which are usually between 9 and 5 when your partner is off at work and completely unable to help you. And you're supposed to tote around and get all of these self-care things done. It's impossible. It's like a full-time job. It's not okay. It's not okay. It needs to come to you in your home. That's where care needs to happen.
And how long does this supportive period need to last?
And many cultures, it's that 6 weeks or 40 days is what it's called. And many, many cultures across the world. And when you're deeply supported for those 40 days or those 6 weeks, there is something magical that happens to the body where you arrive from that. You kind of come out of your cocoon, you blossom, you grow your wings, and you're like, wow, I can do this. And oftentimes, I think a lot of women think that means now I'm done and I can just move on and I don't have to worry about taking care of myself. So I can just get back to the crazy swing of life. And that's not true either. That's not what I'm saying, is that you can just return to the chaos that is. It still means that you have to take care of yourself. It still means that you have to do things differently, that you can't be that go, go, go. You have to rearrange your life and to make sure that you're getting the care that you need so that your family's getting the care that they need. And but I will say, but when we get that solid foundation of 6 weeks or 40 days, then that feels so much more doable. And our body literally has had the foundation of healing to make that possible so that we're not feeling so exhausted. We're not feeling that the depletion in our bones, that rawness that happens with, I just can't do this anymore. I'm crawling at the end of the day. Like I just can't function. There's none of that when we've been deeply supported in the way in which our body needs.
Amazing. Okay, there are a couple of different ways that we could go with this conversation. I want to dig in further of the power of indigenous medicine and practices, because a lot of what I talk about is with alternative spirituality, and a lot of those alternative practices are indigenous, come from indigenous cultures. But I'm sure that there's a mom listening who just heard that ideal and is like, there is no way. I have no family. My partner works, my husband works full time, right? That was me, right? Like I lived far away from the community where I grew up. With my third, I gave birth. We had just moved into a new place, right when I found out I was pregnant. So we'd been there for 9 months, but it wasn't long enough to create those deep lasting friendships to have that ride or die who's going to come out, come over at 6 a.m. and get your kids ready for school and things like that. And so what can the woman who's in that position, who's like, okay, I'm having my second kid, I have no support, my husband has to go to work. What is like the minimum that she can do? How can she get as much as she can out of this postpartum, this beautiful time, right? And set herself up for as much success as she can experience postpartum?
I love this question. And I will tell you too, that even when you do have the family and the friends and all of the people, it can still be incredibly difficult because they don't know what to do. And sometimes they're going to get it wrong, right? Because this is not our culture. This is not how we've been taught. We've forgotten how to care for moms. And so it's often that I see things like meal trains fall through and things like that. But I really recommend that if you're going to have a beautiful postpartum experience, it has to start in pregnancy. You have to prepare. And some even will say before pregnancy begins, you've got to start really preparing yourselves, really preparing your body nutritionally, making sure that you are the healthiest that you can be, that you've detoxed as much as you possibly can, that you are in a state of health and well-being, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And it doesn't matter if you didn't have the opportunity to do that preconception, right? I never did. It was always during pregnancy. You can still do that. It takes a lot of conscious effort and a lot of work, but you can make that happen. And do absolutely everything you can to make sure that you have the people who can support you. Like you have a list of like, if I am going to have breastfeeding issues, which might be a reality, then this is the person that I'm going to call. Like hands down, and I met them and I know them. I've scheduled my appointments. They're aligned with my own beliefs. Make sure that you've got the best postpart or the best birth team. Are they going to really support you? Make sure that you're asking the right questions, especially if you're giving a hospital birth. You want to make sure that you are fully supported in all of your decisions and that you're not going to be at a higher risk of having some sort of birth trauma because that will deeply impact how you experience the postpartum period. And more trauma or even intervention is going to lead to more healing time. And then have those really difficult conversations with your partner, with your other children. Like, this is what I'm going to need. I'm going to need you to show up just like this. And whatever that case may be for you. I remember sitting down with my family I was pregnant with my fourth, and I sat down with my husband and my three kids, and my youngest was like 2, right? Really little toddler. But I had the serious conversation like, mommy's gonna have a baby, and I'm gonna feel really tired, and my body's gonna hurt. And that first couple of weeks, I'm going to need a lot of time to recover so that I can come out of bed and be the best mommy that I can be. But if I don't get that time to rest and recover, mommy's going to be slow and mommy's going to be forgetful and mommy's might cry a lot more. And I'm going to need your help. So when baby sleeps, I'm going to try and rest. When mommy asks for a meal or asks for water, can you please help me? If I ask for you to be quiet, please be quiet and let's work on what does it mean to be quiet, right? And I will tell you, those children were I've never had easier kids. They were like, oh yeah, that's easy. To the point where it was like, Mom, sister is sleeping. You need to go to bed. Here's your blanket. Go to sleep. I'm telling you to go to sleep, which is so cute and so loving, but they just needed direction, right? And I laid it out very clearly for my husband too. These are the things that I'm going to need. We prepped all of our meals in advance. We worked really hard on making sure that he was able to stay home and take extended time because we worked really hard in the pregnancy to ensure that he was going to financially, that we're going to be able to handle that kind of time off. And I get it, it's not doable for everybody, but if it is in any way, shape, form, or fashion, it's a non-negotiable. If you can hire support, if you are in the position, you will not regret it. The only thing you will regret is not doing it. So if you can have somebody come clean your house, if you can have a postpartum doula come help you and take care of you, come into your home and provide that support, if you have that option, it's a non-negotiable. It has to happen.
Mhm. Amazing. Okay. So we've kind of talked about like what is the bare minimum support, and really it sounds like even that conversation that you had with your family, that was a form of self-advocacy, right? Like you advocating for this is what I'm going to need from you all postpartum. This is what it needs to look like so that I can come back and be, the best mom that I can be. How can women advocate for themselves within the healthcare system? Because to your earlier point, they are not set up to support women postpartum. You are absolutely right. I mean, the questions were like, even in the hospital, how are you feeling? Do you feel sad? Do you need drugs? Right? And then on the way out the door, like, hey, what's your birth control plan? And then 6 weeks later, what birth control do you need? Right? Like it was just asinine, honestly, just the lack of support, the lack of care. So how can women advocate for themselves in a healthcare system that is just not set up to support postpartum women?
You have to do it yourself. You have to educate yourself. And that is one of the hardest things, right? Is to have to advocate your needs when really everybody should be rising up to meet you. You should never have to be rising up to meet everybody else in the healthcare world. And that's where we are right now, unfortunately. And that can be the hardest part. I remember being so insanely depressed after having my first, and I knew I needed help. The very idea of getting out of bed outside of having to take care of my son was impossible, let alone making a phone call to a healthcare provider or, whatever it was that I needed in that moment. Even just making myself a meal, even going to take a shower was insanely complicated. And unfortunately, that's the reality of it, right? If we are in that place, the only way that we're going to get out is if we have some other support systems there helping us. We have to recognize that. And two, if we are not getting the support that we need in that way, we're making it a more of a risk that we're going to end up in that predicament where we're not able to get out of bed or worse. And so it's very it's a catch-22 kind of situation where we're doing the hardest work right now. And the hardest work is reclaiming what the wisdoms that we knew a long time ago, reclaiming what our great grandmothers had done for women long, long ago, and understanding those wisdoms and applying them to our own selves. That's hard work. But not only are we breaking generational trauma and what we've experienced over the last several generations, what our moms have endured, our grandmothers have endured, that takes a lot of work. That's hard work in itself. But we're also laying the foundation for our children, for
Mm.
our daughters, for our sons, right? And sometimes it's easier to think of them like I'm going to ensure that I'm getting the absolute best care and that I am educating myself and that I am demanding better and that I am taking care of my nutrient needs and that I'm taking these herbs, that I'm saying, no, 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 I'm not going on birth control or whatever it is that you need, or yet maybe it's I am going on, like whatever it is that you need in that moment, and advocating for yourself. Sometimes it's easier just to think, I'm doing this for my children.
Well, and I think it takes a certain amount of connectedness to yourself. And so I know for myself, I had two hospital births and one home birth. And for me, I found that in the hospital births, in many instances, I was, in a sense, unless they were midwives, which I did, I was so fortunate to be able to find a midwifery group in both of the hospitals that I birthed at. But in a lot of cases, when I was, coming up against, nurses or pediatricians who were coming in to check the baby afterwards, I was really in a position where I had to, in a lot of ways, re-educate them. I had to really advocate for decisions that I had made, research-based decisions that I had made before childbirth, regarding my kids. And I don't want to tell people don't trust your providers, right? Because that's obviously they are doctors, they're educated for a reason, they go to school for a reason. And I think in particular, if you're in a hospital setting, right? Like if you need an emergency C-section, you get the emergency C-section and you trust, that what they're doing is they're looking at your vitals and what they're doing is going to be potentially life-saving. But really just recognizing that your body knows what it's doing and that you can trust if something feels off or if something feels wrong, right? If it feels wrong to, put eye ointment on your baby minutes after they're born, even though your STD tests were clear or what have you, right? Like to trust yourself, right? Is that kind of, I know that's not very scientific and you are so scientific and so research based, but where does intuition come into all of this?
That's a really good question. And first, I want to back up and address the providers because yes, they are there, but you have to understand too that they are there for emergency care. That's what they're trained in. And we want them. We need them for emergency situations. That's why they're there and we love them so much because they do save lives. But that's what their job is to do, is to save lives. They're not there to implement a healing plan. They were never trained to support you in the several weeks and years after having a baby. They were never taught about your postpartum hormones. They were never taught about how birth control impacts your brain changes in the postpartum years, or how your brain changes in the postpartum years. None of that information was part of their training and education. So they're just with you. They're on the same level of you, right? And oftentimes when we are going into the postpartum space, we are thinking about all the things with babies, like you mentioned, the eye ointment, right? And then you've got vaccines, which is a hot topic right now, and all of the decisions about what is best for my baby, especially in the hospital setting, right? And I think all of that is beautiful. We want to be questioning those so that we can develop that sense of intuition and trust within ourselves, because intuition cannot happen until we trust who we are. And so, yes, question all of the things, get very clear about where you stand because you've educated yourself in all of that. But I just wanted to take a moment to really address like that component, because many providers are right there with you. They do not know anything about healing the body after birth. That's not what they're trained in. Even your OB, even your midwife, they're not trained in that. So learn it together, like advocate, like you sometimes, like as you said, you're going to have to speak up and educate and do that. But it takes a lot of learning in that process. And that's what I love, learning and trusting what comes up for you in that process so that you can develop that intuition. I find that so many women have this, and all humans really have this innate connection within. They know the answers. Their body holds the answers. And we actually do have a lot of scientific research to show that, right? That intuition is a really big thing. And that, especially in motherhood, our intuitive abilities really take off for a lot of women. But there are times that we get intuition mixed up with the things that we were taught to believe. Sometimes we get our intuition mixed up with societal pressures and things that our provider has told us, or maybe the stories that we've grown up with or we've witnessed. And those are the hard things to kind of to really put forth and kind of break sometimes, or say, no, this is actually a really good thing. And the only way in which you're going to do that is by, and my way and my belief is connecting in with God or a higher power or whatever it is that you feel called to believe, and really educating yourself as well. Because when those two kind of come together, then you're going to develop that trust that you need, not only externally in the higher power, but also internally within yourself. And then you can feel solid in the intuition. Intuition is something that we all have, but it has to be cultivated. We have to cultivate that within us. And so I often hear a lot of moms say, well, I thought I was supposed to have like this intuitive knowing of like, I'm just going to know how to be a mom when I become a mom. And it's like, yes, and right. There's so many things that oftentimes we're going to have to let go of. We're going to have to educate ourselves with. We're going to have to dive deep, and we're going to have to do the hard work of really learning how to trust ourselves. And there's a multitude of ways in which that's going to have to happen. And then you'll start noticing the intuitive come through.
I really appreciate that you brought up how the medical professionals that are trained to help us during birth are there for an emergency, right? In particular, OB-GYNs. I like to remind, friends and people who are kind of considering, hospital birth or home birth. I get a lot of questions about that because I have experience with both. And I like to remind them, like, OB-GYNs are surgeons. They are trained surgeons. They are trained to do C-sections. It's highly unlikely that you're going to go to a hospital and have a bunch of medical professionals just stand by and watch a totally normal process unfold and remain hands off and not want to intervene and not want to get in the way, right? And it's really amazing to me also having experienced kind of that normal birth process start to finish, right? Within the home birth and kind of water birth experience, just how uneventful it is. And it's so crazy how different that is from what the media and like movies portray it to be. And I'm not saying this to brag at all. It was so painful, right? Like I'm not, in some way better or stronger, but there was no screaming at the top of my lungs. There was a lot of groaning. There was a lot of like maybe towards the end, there was definitely a lot of like painful kind of noises, right? But there's not this like freak out screaming that you see in the hospital scenes in the movies where the mom's being like wheeled, rushing, and it's an emergency, right? Like we are taught from such a young age through the media, through, what we see, and through the birth stories that people love to share, and the more drama, the better. Like we're taught that this is an emergency. We're taught that this is an extraordinary medical procedure, medical experience, when in actuality, is it painful? Is it hard? There's so much to it? Yes, but it's also a really natural part of being a human being, right? And so I so appreciate your perspective there. I really want, Miranda, to get into your background because you have a fascinating story. So can we just kind of put a pin in this and talk about your background? How did you get into this work?
Mm. So I was a biology student before having my babies, and actually getting pregnant kind of put that on holds, because if anybody knows anything about biology and the sciences, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of dedication, but that's always where like my life really revolved around. So when I got pregnant, I was like, ho, 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 like this is a whole new world, right? I was in all the studies, right? I wasn't, and this was 15, almost 16 years ago. So this was a long time. This is before postpartum was even a conversation, right? We weren't talking about things like this, but I really was interested in the birthing process and about conception and about being pregnant. And of course, I've taken some classes on this, but I was really inundated with it, and so it kind of stuck with me. It was like such a fascinating process that I was uncovering, I feel like, scientifically. So, fast forward, I had my postpartum experience with my son, my first, and it was really, really difficult. It was extremely difficult, and I didn't understand because I had the home birth. I had done all the studies, and I looked at all of the research, and like this was the safest option. It was the best option. I had all the things prepared. Like, why did this happen? Because I already knew everything, right? But I didn't, because I've never, one, experienced it, and two, I didn't prepare for anything postpartum. There was nothing postpartum.
It feels like we prepare for the wedding, but not the marriage. I feel like
Oh,
that's
1000%.
so common where we prepare for the birth, but not the baby and the postpartum, right?
1000%. And this was me. And I was like, this is mind blowing to me. Like, why did I become a statistic?
Mm.
Why did I end up in this space? And why am I struggling so much? Like, I just didn't understand. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I knew the numbers in my head. One of seven at the time, it was one of seven will develop postpartum depression. And I'm like, I obviously am not the only one. I can go to a mom group or a playground or go to the grocery store. There's tons of moms. Chances are there's a lot more people walking around with the exact same things that I'm going through. But it felt so isolating. It felt so deep and alone. And I was like, and my scientific brain was very much like, okay, now that I have experienced this and I see it for what it is, if I could just step out for a second, step out of what it is that I'm feeling and figure out how do I get myself out of this predicament? How do I heal my body?
Mm.
And that's really when I started. Again, I go back to what I know, research. And I was dumbfounded by how little there was, how there was so little information. There are thousands and thousands and thousands more studies done on postpartum cows than there are on humans.
Oh my
I mean,
gosh,
it's astronomical.
it's nuts.
And I was just blown away by the lack of evidence, the lack of science. And I was like, okay, now where do I go? What do I do? Because clearly we don't have any of the information that we need in order to understand this process. Like it's just, they still think that it's like some sort of brain thing going on here. And I know that there's so much more. I felt it. I knew it deeply that there was so much more of the conversation that's just not being had. And that was really my journey. I went back to school. I started writing books. I was talking at universities. I really inundated myself. I was having conversations with moms. I became a postpartum doula. I was started doing childbirth education courses locally. I was just very heavily involved for years, just building up my resume, taking courses. I became specialized in perinatal mental health and nutrition specifically for the perinatal period, and so many other avenues. I ended up going back to school and really, really just put my everything together into what I have created over the last 15 years, which is what I have now, Postpartum University, where we share all of this research and all of this data and my framework for healing, which I have been able to use for the last 15 years, supporting thousands of women in healing deeply at the root. And that's what we focus on here. So it's been a beautiful journey of putting it all together, but what a wild ride.
Well, I'm grateful for your journey because I am one of those women who, had postpartum anxiety after my first and just, just felt unsupported. And like I said, my emotional experience, I think it was the highlight after, in particular, my second. Like really, I followed your nutrition plan to the T and was really, really good about it. Had very good support in those couple weeks postpartum. And it was just night and day. Like I don't think I've ever been so happy honestly, in my whole life than I was like postpartum with my second. Well, I got so excited. I was like, oh, I could have 10 kids. And I immediately got pregnant with my third. So thank you, Miranda. Thank you for that, for the 2 under 2 experience. But so you kind of touched on your difficult postpartum experience. Can we dig a little deeper into that? Like kind of what specifically did you experience and what pulled you out of it, right? Like what was the problem and then how did you fix it?
I love this question. So after having my son, I think it was a good solid 2 weeks. And I will tell you that there was so much around that experience that I was um, back home living with my mom and my partner. Like my situation, my financial situation was pretty destitute. We had just, we were struggling in Chicago. I had moved to Chicago. I was like going to make it big, and then found out that I was pregnant and I had no support system whatsoever. He was struggling to find a job. We were just not in a predicament, a good predicament for raising a child. We had to fly back home. And I ended up we were living in my parents' house and it was extremely difficult. And I had a lot of issues with my mom at the time. Like we were trying, and it's always a work in progress, but I remember, and this will give highlight to a little bit of my experience. I went into labor. I was having contractions. My mucus plug came out, like all of the, really exciting things that tell you that you're in labor. And I was having contractions for hours and hours. It started at like 5 o'clock in the morning. And then my mom comes by the room right around like noon or 1. And I said, Mom, I'm in labor. She had slept in, like she sleeps in on the weekends or used to. So I wasn't going to wake her, but she came in and she looked at me and she said, "Did your water break?" I said, "No, not yet." And she said, "Well, then you're not in labor." And she walked away. So the lack of validation, the lack of support, and then my partner and I were going through a lot. I actually became a single mom when I was 6 months postpartum. So there was a lot of going on in my life where I just felt I wasn't good enough financially. I wasn't good enough in my relationships. I wasn't good enough for my mother. So there was a lot of things that were transpiring in my life. And when postpartum came around, um, I I felt, I remember specifically my mom saying, "What are you doing? Like, why are you still like sitting around? It's been 2 weeks. Like, get up, go walk, go do, go do stuff. Like, what are you doing?" And at the time, I ended up I had several blood clots. So I was still having a hard time walking at this point. And I ended up, walking was very painful. And sitting up and moving my body, I actually ended up passing several massive blood clots. And then I was able to walk again. And thankfully, there was no emergency scenario or anything like that. But maybe some retained placenta that had come out. We don't know because I was fine afterwards. There was no infection, whatever. But again, lack of validation. And so moving forward, like this was a constant reoccurring thing, right? There was nobody there to like really celebrate. Like I remember my milk coming in at like day 5. And I was like, my milk came in. And I remember my dad passing in the hall. I was like, Dad, my milk came in. And he was like, okay. Like, and I was like, I just had somebody, nobody else was home. Like, I just, you know what I mean? Like, I needed somebody to share that and celebrate that with. And I was like, and it was, rah, rah, rah. And so that was like the whole process of my whole postpartum experience. And then it just got really dark. And I remember not wanting to cook for myself. And that was a responsibility that was on me, right? My parents were, yes, living in the home, but they were cooking for themselves. You go grocery shopping and you cook for your own self, right? I was paying rent. I was like, it was a very difficult situation where I wasn't getting a lot. I've not actually shared this publicly. I wasn't getting the support that I absolutely needed. I was basically being a single mom. And that was really hard. And of course, my partner was back at work and he had no idea how to help. And my baby only wanted me. And that transition of like learning how to breastfeed, my nipples were painful. They were bleeding at one point. I was stressed out. Nobody would listen to me. Like I had nobody to talk to about the birth experience, about anything, along those lines, or about, the celebrations of my milk coming in, or like this thing that I discovered. Did you see that like cute little, gas reflex smile? None of those things were something that I could communicate and share. And it just unraveled. And I lost myself. I didn't know who I was. I couldn't appreciate any of the things that I used to love. I couldn't get out anymore. I didn't want to go on walks. I didn't want to get out of the house. I didn't want to eat. I wasn't even hungry. I just found myself struggling immensely. And then on top of it, sleep deprivation. I had no idea what I was doing. I had, my intuition, my mom needs were saying, do this thing here. And everybody else was telling me, no, you're going to spoil your baby. It's going to end up wrong. Put him in his crib, let him cry. And, there was this battle of back and forth that I was having within myself. And it was extremely painful. And right after I lost my relationship and I truly became a single mom, I think that was kind of the turning point of, holy crap, I have to get my life together because I have a kid and I am almost 25 and I'm living at my parents' house. There was like a quarter life crisis, as I call it. I had a whole crisis of like, I have to do something now because my health, my body felt like it was falling apart. Like things were happening, my hormones were off the charts. I wasn't sleeping. To the point where I was hallucinating at night. Like I would imagine like the curtains were coming alive and they were trying to get me. At one point I ran out of the room, right? Like I was an absolute disaster of a mess. And I couldn't understand why anybody else couldn't see that I was a disaster of a mess and wasn't willing to help and support me. And I thought I had to do it all on my own. Like, this is just how momhood is, and I have to figure it out. And it was when I took a step back and kind of did like this whole evaluation of like, okay, where am I? And what the hell am I doing? Where is my joy? I need to be able to get out of bed for more than just diaper changes and holding my son. Like he's he is witnessing me right now. And soon he's going to start holding these memories. And I don't ever want him to see this. And it was very much a trial and error of, I don't even know where to begin. Like, what the heck do you do when you are so low, when you have nothing? That's what I felt like. The only thing I had was him. I had nothing else. So what am I going to do? Like, how do I get better? Like, what are the things that are going to make me feel better? And so I wrote down a list of things that might work. And I literally just went down them. And some of them were like, okay, I know for a fact, like, I've got to get a job. Like, I can't, like, I had money saved up. And then when I became a single mother, there's no more, like, there's no, that was it. That was the end of that. And my parents were very much, you still have to pay rent and all of that. And of course, now I have diapers and a baby and all of that. I've got to get a job. So that was first and foremost, like, how can I work with my baby? And I actually worked in childcare for many years. So it was like a very easy thing for me to like blend that. And it was a huge relief. And then it was just a matter of like continuing down that road. Okay, now that I've got that secure, what's next? What's next? And I kept looking, and it was very much an experiment. I took up painting, I took up photography. I was like trying to like find myself in all of these pieces. And I started with the things that I had loved before. And then when they didn't work, I just like, okay, that was really good. And I threw it out, right? Or, I remember, for example, like doing photography. I ended up meeting somebody in the photography class who was also a mom. And then I was like, well, this is not working. Like photography is not working for me. But this person led me to this mom's hiking group. And that was really helpful because then I was able to connect in with other people who was in a very similar stage that I was in. And so that felt really good. And so it was like just a matter of like finding these tiny little pieces and these little things and collecting them is what I felt like I was doing. And it was a lot of trial and error. It took me 2 solid years to dig my way out of that experience. And I tell people, please don't do what I did, right? Don't, do not do what I did. There's a far easier way. One is get help, right? Go find a counselor, go find somebody that you can talk to and share this load with. Do not hold it. I felt like I couldn't say anything. I was scared to death that if I did tell somebody or end up in counseling, that I would become even more not good enough, and that there was this potential for some reason that somebody would take my baby. I was scared to death. Right. And again, this is like full on anxiety and also, depression, both of them hand in hand. And so don't do what I did. This is not how you do it. Go get support, go get help. And then really, I developed a 5-point framework that tells you exactly where to focus so that you can feel your best faster than anything that I have ever went through. So, and it works. We've seen it work with thousands and thousands of women. So, again, don't do what I did. You don't have to take the long road. There is a better way. But that's really my story through that. I did get married and I met the love of my life, and we've been married almost 11 years and we had 3 more kids. And I did go on to experience an amazing, incredible second birth and postpartum, which unfortunately I thought that, oh, I know everything. Like I experienced that. I was super scared of everything. And I was like, I'm going to implement everything in the very beginning. And then now I'm good, right? 3 months goes by and I'm like, psh, I'm flying on top of the world. I literally felt so good in my body that I went straight back to the go, go, go. And that's exactly what I did. And I crashed so hard. And I learned about what mom rage meant. I learned about anxiety on a deeper level. And I was also diagnosed with a postpartum autoimmune disorder. And I say postpartum because 30% of women are diagnosed with a postpartum disorder in the first year after giving birth. And that was not something that I was familiar with, but God gave me that beautiful, beautiful lesson so that I can share that with others. And then I had a third baby who I experienced postpartum bipolar with. That was an experience of where I needed so much support. And I thought because of my position, because of what it is that I do, that was not something that I was going to be able to share with anybody. I actually recently just recorded a podcast episode about my postpartum bipolar journey. I'm just very excited to finally share that journey 9 years later. And then I had gone on to have another baby, and that was very much like, okay, let's get real. I'm going to sit down with myself. I know exactly what I need. I know exactly how to be supported. And now I actually have to do it. I can't just know it. I have to implement it. And I have to do this very deeply and effectively. And that was by far the best pregnancy, the best postpartum. And of course, I'm close to 40 at this point in time. No, I was 36 at this time of having her. And it was absolutely amazing. Like literally, I felt like I was frolicking in a field of flowers for months on end. And it stayed that way. It stayed that way for a very long time. And so I know it's possible to have this beautiful postpartum experience because I experienced that myself. And so many other women across the world experience those beautiful times as well. It's not all, depression and anxiety and mental health and pain and frustration and hormone imbalance. That's not what it is. That's not how we're supposed to live. And I'm very grateful that I got to experience all of it so that I can help more people learn how to do what I did and avoid what the others.
Oh, Miranda, you walked so that the rest of us could run. Honestly, I am just so grateful to you. And, as hard as those experiences were to go through, I really feel like you got such a breadth of experience in so many different ways. I mean, from the like single mom, partner leaving, no support, even to because I think it's so easy for us to say, well, if only my partner, right? But then you had this amazing partner and you still experience postpartum rage and bipolar, right? And so I think just having that context to really be able to share the kind of full picture of what we need is such a gift, is truly such a gift. And again, I know that myself and thousands of other women have benefited from this. I have a lot more that I want to talk about regarding like the nutritional basics, because I know that's a huge part of what you do and all of that. But can we just take a moment and talk about millennials and their parents? Because the experience that you had with your mom and with your parents is heartbreaking. And yet, I'm sure that there were moments and aspects of their parenting that were so amazing, right? And that you're so grateful for. And I'm your friend, so we've had these conversations in depth for years. Um, I think that there are so many of us as millennials, myself included, where we are so grateful for who our parents were in our lives. And so this isn't a matter of like simple ungratefulness or being spoiled or what have you. We can see how supportive and how amazing our parents were. And yet, wh- I don't know if you can give any insights on this, but what it seems to me like when millennials became adults, I don't know if it's how much information we had available to us at our fingertips. I don't know if it's the kind of the breadth of opportunity that became available for us career-wise because of the internet. I don't know what it was, but I found that when I became an adult, I completely lost my parents. And all of a sudden, they became the center of their lives, and their absolute number one priority became their comfort, right? And it was such a contrast from what I saw their parents do, right? Like the amazing silent generation, right? They spent their entire life in service to others. And obviously, there were things that weren't amazing about that generation as well. But I mean, I just remember like my grandmother coming for a month and she did everything, cook, clean, took care of us kids. I was the oldest of four. So I have distinct, clear memories of all of this, and then, my experience was just so vastly different. And even thinking about my kids, like just the recognition that I had when I became a mom of like, this is a lifelong vocation. I'm a mom. And then I don't retire. Like then I'll be a grandma, God willing, And it's like, and I expect that to be work. And I expect to have to show up for that. And I am so not alone. So many of my friends have the exact same experience where we don't have any allo parents. We don't have any support. Our retired parents are too busy. They've got too much going on. What is going on, Miranda?
I have spent a lot of time diving into this because this was a huge component. And I shared just a couple of examples of my own experiences and my times with my parents, which is vastly different than a lot of experiences, but also the very same as a lot of experiences of millennials. And it's unfortunate, right? But I also recognize, I look at what my parents have gone through and I see very clearly, oh, okay, the amount of trauma that they have experienced and what they have gone through in their lives, I can see exactly why they did the things that they did. And it makes sense for me. And it's not an excuse for anything that they've ever done. And my parents are very, very similar in that they're doing their own thing in their own life. And, they want me to show up with my 4 kids. Like, why don't you come by? And I'm like, I'm so busy, but you can come by anytime. You know how to get in my house, like, we've been working on our relationships and they've been working on themselves. They've spent the last 10 years getting sober, and doing all this amazing work and taking really good care of their health. And I'm very, very proud of how far my parents have come. And also, I have spent over a decade healing. And I'm not saying that I'm healed. Like, there are still things that come up for me that I'm like, oh, that was really hard, or like, wow, I really, really felt that. And at the same time, and I can actually share a story because this is like real for me in the here and now, about how this transpires in like different levels of healing here. But it was a lot of work to get into that space. And I tell you, I think our parents are just insanely traumatized. And not to say that we're not. I think we're traumatized because they were so traumatized, and we're living in a world of like so much, we all got so much trauma. And when we came into this space, I don't know exactly what it was, but we're like, the buck stops here. I'm breaking this generational trauma. I'm done with this. I have no idea what it is about this generation that I almost feel like it's become a trend, and one that's here to stick. And I'm
Correct.
so glad that we've become so consciously aware of the effects that our parents, in which they have raised us, and our experiences, not just how our parents have shaped us, but you know, uh, the things that have transpired in our lives, the difficult and the wonderful, the things that have happened in school, the parties that we went to, like the crazy things that have happened in our lives and in our world, and how that all affected us. And we are more consciously aware of that. And I think we are making some significant changes so that our children don't have to carry the burden that we have carried. And in that, we are healing ourselves. And I'm so excited for this generation. I mean, they are healing. So we've healed so much for them.
Mhm.
And of course, we can't do it all. And I'm probably leaving behind a lot of things that I can't even see, that my children are going to end up having to heal. And I'm okay with that because I know what I also have left behind, and things that they would never even get to. They don't have a clue about. I'll share with you a quick story too about healing on different levels. I have been turning 40 here very soon, and things are shifting within my body, and I'm very in tune with my body, and how things are playing out. And it's my hormones are changing, right? We're entering into the perimenopause stage, which is a whole nother ball game, a whole nother conversation of lack of science and all of this. And so I've been tuning into like specific areas of my body and like really listening in. Like, this is a deep meditation practice where I'm like focusing on my gut, and then I focus on my liver, and then I focus on my thyroid, like different parts of my body. And I go through all of the organs and I listen. I deeply listen. And I hit my HPA axis. So it's right in the back of your head, right in the back here. And I just sat there with this. And this was like the first time that I was like, I'm gonna really focus here. I need to focus here. Like, this is not something that most people would focus on, but I need to focus here. And in that, I saw an image of my mother holding me as an infant.
Mhm.
And the memory of being dropped on a concrete floor, my mother dropped me on a concrete floor when I was an infant, and the back of my head was what hit. And I had cranial sacral work done probably 10 years ago. And somebody had said to me, the cranial sacral therapist, she, this is not a story that I tell. Like, this is just something that, whatever, she's doing her work. And she was like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? There is something back here. And she's holding back here, where my HPA axis is. She said, this is deep. Something really awful happened here. What happened? You were dropped. And she starts like feeling intuitively whatever. And I was like, yeah, my mom shared that with me. My mom has always been very open with me. She's very like sharing of her experiences and raising me and all of this. And I've been so grateful for that. And yeah, and it was like, it was very confirming. And she was like, you have no idea, like this is a big area that you're going to have to work on. Years later, I was interviewing for someone for my podcast who happened to be an intuitive medical person, and she said, "Can I share something with you?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And it was off recording, but she said, "Your HPA axis has been slightly shattered." And she was like, "I don't know what happened to you, but it feels like it just like something hit it and it shattered in pieces. Like there's like little pieces everywhere." And she's like, "It's more of like metaphorically, and like you're gonna have to bring all of that back." And so I've been feeling this lately. This is something that has come up to me. And so when I tuned in, like all of these stories like are all of a sudden like playing in my head, and I'm sitting there watching my mother hold my baby, and then all of a sudden I'm on my own chest. Like this is a whole all visualization, and I'm literally holding myself
Mm.
as an infant, and I'm telling myself, you're safe. I'm
Mm.
here for you. I am the mother you need to have. And I'm right here for you, and I'm never going to leave you, and you're safe. And I'm finding myself saying this over and over and over again. And for a good solid week, I would have my baby. I would carry my baby right here on my chest. And interestingly enough, I am holding myself, my baby, and this visualize right where I'm having this reoccurring breast lump that happens with my cycles because of estrogen dominance. And I'm seeing this play out.
Mm.
So I don't know the answer because I'm in the midst of all of this, but that experience of not, I mean, could you imagine the trauma that happened, and not just physical trauma of an infant hitting their head on the floor, but the emotional of, I don't feel safe in my mother's arms. That can play such a significant role in who we are. And so I'm grateful that I have been able to kind of shed a lot of the years of my living to get to the point of, oh, I can look at this infant phase of my life and start healing that piece, because we can't even get there if we're still working on things that have happened to us in our 30s and our 20s and our teens and our childhood, right? And this is just one of those extra spaces that I get to heal. And I don't know if it'll ever end. Like, I think that the healing journey is always constant forever. And we can't force anything to happen. We can just let it flow and just be a part of our bodies and be in tune and have that connection. But being able to do that in recognition of what our parents have done and where they are in their life. And really, I do truly believe that they have done their best and that I get to do my best. And it's going to be way different than what they did. And that's
Miranda,
very healing for me.
that was such a beautiful story, and that's such a gracious response. Like this, that was an important reframe for me of like how traumatized must they be, right? And just really thinking about how much our generation emphasizes emotional healing, how much we emphasize emotional intelligence. It is such a gift to be able to, and I think that's where we're all trying to get to, is to be able to look at what they did and just be like, I'm so grateful. And this recognition of we're so different and that it's totally okay. And I know for myself, I have really been working on not taking it personally because I look at my kids and I'm like, oh my gosh, if my child is having a baby, it is like 3 months off. I'm going to go live with you, like, or wherever you want me to live. If you want me to be in a hotel, whatever, right? And just like so all in as much as they'd like me to be, right? While also allowing them to set healthy boundaries. I think that I'm doing that because I love them, but actually I'm doing that because that's who I am.
Mm.
And I
Uh,
think it took me a long time to feel like, oh, they must just not love me because they're not doing what I think, what I need, right? They're not giving me what I need as parents, but that's where they're at and that is who they are right now. Anyways, I'm so grateful for your story because that was a reframe that I needed. So thank you so much for that. Okay, it's hard to move on from that, but I really, really want to get into how long postpartum actually lasts and then also the nutritional basics that we need because we're told that you're postpartum for 6 weeks and then you go back to work. And I know that's not true. You have research that says it's not true. How long is a mom postpartum, even after just one kid?
Well, I mentioned how the joints and ligaments take up to a year to return to their pre-pregnancy state, right? Then we have brain changes that take an upwards of 2 to 3 years, right? So that mom brain, 2 to 3 years postpartum. And that's not including if you're breastfeeding, it's longer, right? So we know that the hormonal changes take 2 to 3 years, again, not including breastfeeding. So you can add at least an additional year after breastfeeding, whatever that means for you. And getting back into what feels like a normal for you, where you are back in your body almost, not necessarily reborn or not getting your body back, because I don't believe in that whatsoever. Nothing was taken from you. This is just who you are in your space as a mother. We know studies show that 5 to 6 years. So oftentimes, nutritionally, we'll talk about that as well. It takes a good 2 to 3 years to replete your nutrient stores because it takes so much to grow a human being and to birth a human being. And oftentimes, for many, to breastfeed that baby as well. That's a lot of your being that is being created for another. So it takes a long time. And, it depends on where you are in your postpartum journey. And I think this is the hardest part of all postpartum things, right? Because we're always looking for the finite answer. We're looking for just that quick thing. Just tell me what it is, right? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? The answer is yes, yes, yes. And it depends on who you are. How much time did you get in the very early stages of postpartum? How much support did you get? How much were you nourished? How good do you feel in your body? How was your birth experience? What's your history like? All of those will play a deep role in how you are feeling in the years after having a baby. We just know it's years. It's not months, it's years. And depending on, all of the above of your experiences. It could be 4 years, it could be 6 years, it could be three.
Mm. That's so helpful. And I think, for those of us who have multiple children, just that recognition of it could be 11 years that you're postpartum, right? Because if you start with one and then you have a couple more kids, it takes time. What are the nutritional basics? And you talk about this in your book. I'm going to go ahead and just pull it up. So the Reclaiming Postpartum Wellness, which is an amazing book, and you share so much of your knowledge. I think this is a really, really good starting point for women who are just being introduced to you right now and who just want like, where do I start postpartum? And I will link it down below. You have some recipes here, but can we talk about like the basic kind of foundational framework of your nutrition plan postpartum?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I'm glad that you love the fact that I couldn't give a solid answer to how long of postpartum you will be. But with that said, it doesn't matter where you are in your postpartum period. You could be several years out, and it's never too late to heal your body. And I think a lot of women ask that question of like, how long am I supposed to be in this space? Because they're tired and they're frustrated and they want out. And this is not how they want to feel in their body. And I will tell you, there is a better way. And no matter where you are in your experience, you can have a better experience. And it doesn't have to be dark. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be resentful and fearful and painful and all of those other things. We don't have to live in that space. So no matter where you are in your postpartum journey, whether you're coming up in postpartum to a postpartum experience and you're pregnant or you're weeks out, months out, years out, that book is a really great starting point because I actually show you what's happening within your body, the physiological and psychological changes. And then I give you the tools in which to support those changes so that you can maximize feeling better. And one of those ways in which to do it, and one of the most important pieces to that whole puzzle, is postpartum nutrition. Because 80% of women enter postpartum very depleted of key nutrients, right? We're just not eating well. And we're not eating enough. And oftentimes we're relying on supplements. And oftentimes women don't even have access to quality foods in their areas, right? And so what we're finding is that so many women enter into this space very, very depleted. And that makes sense because you grew a human being with your body. Like, oh my word. Like, so much has just transpired for you. So, and then you have the birth experience, which, a lot of people have equated to running a marathon. And what happens when a person is about to run a marathon, before they run a marathon, they are carb loading, they are protein loading, not immediately before, but they're preparing their body deeply. Right. And that's hard to do when you're pregnant, is to prepare for that, right? Like you only have so much room in that space in your gut to have a whole meal, right? So it's a little bit harder to do. And then you enter in postpartum. So let's talk about the postpartum physiological shifts that take place in the gut. After birth, your nervous system shifts entirely. It goes into a state of overdrive almost, where it's like, I have to focus on healing. This is my priority. I've got to stop bleeding. My hormones are shifting. I've got to live, right? I've got to live. And so your nervous system shifts and it goes into a state of a fight or flight or freeze or whatever it is, right? This is how we know it scientifically to be. Your body is not in a rest, calm, digest state, as we call it. That's not what it's doing in the least bit. So when that happens after birth, and it doesn't matter what kind of birth experience you've had, you could have the most amazing birth experience. It doesn't matter. Your body's in a survival state. It's doing everything it can to hurry up, stop the bleeding, repair whatever it is that it needs. And and it stays in that state for quite some time, for days and weeks, depending on your birth experience, much longer, depending on the amount of support you get, much longer, right? And so when that happens, our ability to digest, so our bodies create gastric acids and enzymes that are necessary to break down the nutrients in your gut. So if you're eating food, that food has to be broken down so that it can be absorbed into your body. And so your body's saying, I just don't have the ability right now. I don't have the energy. I cannot focus on creating those gastric acids and enzymes and all of those things that are necessary to break that food down. This is not my area of focus. I got to go figure out how to live right now, right? So we're not digesting. This is not a massive thing that you are needing. Even though you might be absolutely starving in postpartum, right? That first meal after having a baby is often where we're just like, give me everything, right? We had to be really careful about how we eat. Yes, I want you to have that giant chocolate cake and I want you to eat, all the sushi in the world that you weren't able to eat and pregnancy, whatever the case may be. Yes, I want you to have like the feast of feast. However, your body is not wanting you to have that. It
Mhm.
wants you to
Not
eat
ready.
food
You're saying
that
the body isn't ready to digest that.
yeah, it's not ready. It's not ready. Our brain is ready for it. We want it because we haven't had it in forever, right? And now that we have this room and this space, our brains are wanting it, but our body says no. This is not the time. So what we have to do instead is eat foods that are already broken down, that are already easy for our body to absorb. So a lot of times when we look at postpartum foods, and I see this all the time, the focus is nutrient dense and we need nutrient dense. We want all the nutrient dense foods because we need a lot of nutrients. And we recognize that. We know that. Science has already proven that a million times over. And women really don't need science to prove that to them. They already have got it. They already innately know I need a lot of nutrients. So they focus on nutrient dense foods. However, this is where so many get it wrong because, I can go to Pinterest and search all of the postpartum meals and I will cry at what I find because a lot of times it's salads and smoothies and big dense casseroles, right? And we call that nutrient dense. And it's very nutrient dense, but it is the worst thing for a postpartum mom because it's not easy to digest. And that's what they forget. So, yes, nutrient dense foods that are easy to digest. That's step two. So, when we look at this in a cultural sense, we already know that cultures around the world, they all practice the exact same thing. Their ingredients are slightly different, but the way in which they cook these foods and the way in which they're presented are all the same. Soups, broths, stews, right? They're liquid form. They're easy to digest because the cooking process has already done so much of the breaking down of those nutrients. And that is very helpful for a postpartum body because you don't want extra energy to go into trying to get your body to absorb food when that energy really needs to go to other parts of your body and healing and hormones and all of the things. You don't want to exert extra energy you don't have. So the key component there is to make sure that you're combining the nutrient dense foods that are easy to digest. And what happens if we're not eating nutrient dense foods? Let's talk about that. Gas, bloating, constipation, right? And in postpartum, oftentimes we call that normal. We tell women all the time, that's normal. That's just your hormones. And of course, you're afraid to poop because you just gave birth. And yes, like the first poop is always the hardest, right? And if we're not eating well because our body is struggling, then that food literally will sit in the gut longer. And what happens to food that sits in the gut longer? Right? I say this lightly. This is not exactly what happens, but it's food that sits longer kind of rots, right? It's not necessarily what's happening in your gut, but it causes the bloating, it causes the gas, it causes the discomfort and the indigestion. It's not digesting well. And then what happens? If that happens for a long period of time, your body is going to say, wait a second, she's eating celery again, or whatever it is, or, chicken nuggets, leftover chicken nuggets, from your toddler, whatever it is that you're eating. And it's going to say, this is bad, right? And now we have food sensitivities and we have allergies, and we have leaky gut, right? And it spirals out of control. And we know the connection between the gut and the brain. We call it the gut brain axis, right? This is not new science. This is very old science, and it's very, very helpful. And I love this science because there's so much more that is growing and we're learning and shifting. And I will tell you, we know how deeply connected our hormones are within our gut. Our feel-good hormones are actually created in the gut, not the brain. And so when the gut is not getting what it needs and its inability to absorb and digest, and now it's having bloated and it's having inflammation. Okay. So in postpartum, we already have high levels of inflammation. And that's a biological normal. We need that inflammation because that inflammation is the trigger in our body that says, hey, something's not right. We want to make sure that you heal. And in order for you to heal, we have to ramp up inflammation so that everybody's on high alert and we get to healing. And we want that. That's a biological normal. But what happens is that inflammation is not supported. We don't help that inflammation heal. We don't help our bodies. We're not supporting our bodies, especially with nutrition. Nutrition is the foundation of everything, right? Nutrition is what makes white blood cells. Nutrition is what heals tissues, right? Nutrition is what creates hormones and regulates hormones. You cannot live without nutrition. It does everything within your body. And so when we are not getting the nutrients that we need, that inflammation continues to stay where it's at or even gets worse. And when we have inflammation in our bodies, it wreaks havoc on everything, right? We can actually predict when somebody has inflammatory markers in their gut to postpartum depression and depression in general. We know that if somebody has these inflammatory markers and they don't even have depression, we can predict that it will happen. We will know when somebody's going to have depression because of the inflammatory markers that exist within their gut. And so this is gut brain axis 101, right? And so you have to make sure that your gut is super healthy. And if it's not, you're going to experience it here in mental health disorders. And it goes both ways. And there's so many more components that we can dive into, but that's a huge, huge component right there.
That's huge. And I think because it's so difficult for the mom to do anything postpartum, I'm sure that that nourishment is the first thing to go. I know that was the case for me with my oldest. It was like, okay, I had her in the middle of the night. So my first meal was McDonald's and it was huge because I hadn't eaten, right? And then, you're not cooking. So you're eating like Easy Mac and quick meals and fast food and whatever people drop off, which is typically salads and casseroles and things like that. And so it makes perfect sense that the disorders that are so common postpartum are directly related to kind of the first thing to go out the door postpartum, which is this like warm, nutritious, these nourishing meals, right? Miranda, I know we are at time. There was one more thing I wanted to touch on. Do you have time or do you need to?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So the last thing that I wanted to really touch on with you, and you brought it up when you were talking about your postpartum experience with your son. And, that first postpartum experience where you were like, I've got to do something about this. And it was so interesting to me that the first thing you went to, kind of besides the job, was what do I enjoy? And it was like painting and photography and hiking. And it was these hobbies. And I know, for myself, as a traditional Catholic, as a theologian, as someone who kind of spends a lot of time in that online space, I have been noticing a really disturbing trend online where people who call themselves traditional, they're not really traditional, but people who call themselves kind of trad are really advocating for this consuming form of motherhood, right? Where it's like, it's only a few years, your kids are only young once. And so it's like, get married young, have as many children as you can, and just completely engross yourself in being with your children, right? Don't worry about work or doing anything for yourself because this is what's best for your family. This is what's best for your children. And it's only for a short time, right? And I've seen this kind of rage its head full force online, and people are even judging moms for wanting to work part-time or have be away from their kids for any amount of time. There was a woman who was doing the podcast rounds saying like no one else should be watching your kids before the child is 3, right? So for 3 years, you need to be the only person with your children if you can. And if not, it needs to be one other allo parent for perhaps 1 hour a day max, right? And it was just creating these expectations for moms to really just become engrossed in this all-consuming motherhood. And I am really concerned about what that is going to do to this kind of next generation of mothers who, I can definitely see how we went way too far in the 70s with like sending women to work and sending kids to daycare. And, the way that the kind of second wave suffragists said, like, you owe it to your foremothers to go to work and get out there. I can totally see how that went too far. But I also wonder if the pendulum is swinging way too far in the other direction, where now women are being shamed for wanting to do anything else, right? For wanting to have any hobbies, anything for themselves, right? And I will say that speaking for myself, most of the people who really advocate for this like hyper traditional view, which again is not super really traditional, but I'll use their language, this hyper traditional form and view of motherhood. Most of them were raised by like single moms or came from broken homes. And so for them, that's what was missing, right? That was their ideal. For me, I was the oldest of a large family. I am one of four. I had a stay-at-home mom, for pretty much my entire childhood. I grew up in this very traditional family. And I will say that growing up in that environment, my mom taught me so much about what it means to be a great mother and prioritizing your family. And she was truly an amazing mom, truly. However, I watched her suffer. Like, I watched her be extremely frustrated that her gifts and her talents were not being recognized in the world. My dad was a doctor, and so everyone was super impressed with him. But, no one asks a stay-at-home mom, like, oh, what do you do all day, right? Because we know what you do all day, right? And it's the cooking and it's the cleaning and it's the so important work of taking care of a family. But what a stay-at-home mom does all day doesn't give us any indication about who she is and what she's interested in, right? And so people don't, it takes a lot of digging to find out who a person is. And people would rather just take the easy road of, oh, you're a veterinarian, like let's talk about that, right? So I think that there is a generation of women, in particular, again, going back to this millennial conversation, like we watched our mothers, for those of us who came from these traditional stay-at-home environments, we watched our mothers in many ways suffer from a lack of recognition, a lack of friendships, a lack of intellectual stimulation. And you went to hobbies. Like when you were looking to get out of your mental health crisis, you went to hobbies. You went to things that were creative, that were just for you. Can you talk a little bit about what does having things that are just for you, what does that alone time, what does that, like, yes, I am a mother and that is the absolute priority in my life, but I also am a human being. And what does that setting aside time and carving out that time, what does that look like and what role does that play postpartum and when it comes to women's mental health?
This is beautiful, Janelle, all of this. And I think you said everything so perfectly about the pendulum swinging, and we're going to the next phase, which is going to be traumatic in and of itself. Like there's never, um, a one way or the other. There's always a healthy blend, right? When I always hear like the most controversial topics ever, there's never both sides are wrong. right? It's somewhere in the middle. And this is exactly where I found myself. And I found myself wondering, who am I? That was the big question, because I know that I was a mom, but there's so much more to life than just being a mom. Not to say that being a mom isn't everything. It is so much of who I am. First and foremost, I am a wife and I am a mother. Like that is so much to me. And I create. That's what I do. I create human beings. I create quilts. I create a home. I create meals. I create all the time. That's what I do. And I love to create things that are nourishing. I love to create things that are beautiful, like my children. I love to create things that feel good. And so finding something, and that's usually what we do as women when we say, I got to go find myself and I got to pick up a hobby because I got to go create something. I have to have this outlet. I have to go create. I have to go use my hands because that is what I do. And I think that's the trad wife kind of thing, is like it's all about creation, right? I'm going to go take this home that my husband has provided or this house, and I'm going to make it a home. And I'm going to take this food and I'm going to make it a meal, right? And that's what, I'm going to take these children, I'm going to raise them to be these beautiful adults that are so kind and understanding and maybe know another language, whatever it is that you decide is important to you, and you create that in your life. And for me, it was very much of like, okay, who am I and what is it that I want to create? Where, and I knew that intrinsically, I think, and cultures around the world, that's what they do. That's how they practice. Like there's no such thing, if we look back in other cultures around the world 100 years ago, there's no counselors, there's no therapists, and many of them still don't use that. It's what do you create and what do you give to your community? How do you belong into your community? How are you valuable to your community? And oftentimes that means, how do I create? How do I grow? How do I fit in this space? And there's so many different ways in which we can do that. And oftentimes we have to find ourselves as human beings. Because, if you get too lost into the motherhood, I mean, eventually your kids are going to leave.
Mhm.
They're going to go off to college. They're going to go be grown adults. They're going to have their own families. And the last thing you want to do is be that mom who can't let go. That would be the death of you, really. And we watch it. We've seen it. We know exactly what that looks like because we know mothers who have seen it. We have mother-in-laws who will do it, right? Like we know what it feels like, and we don't want to be those people. And if we make our children the only thing in our lives, yes, of course they're the number one or number two priority. However, God has been, children, whatever it is for you, and like where they show up in priorities. But the next is yourself, right? And how that fits. And I put myself much higher on that list. It's me after God, and then my husband and my children, and me only because if I don't put me up there, the everybody else is going to suffer. I am so much more of a present mother and a present wife and a happy mother when I get to have me time, when I feel full in myself, and when my health and well-being is taken care of mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. If that's not taken care of, everybody else is going to pay the price, because really mothers are the center of their home, right? In the traditional sense, if we are going to follow that everything that you were saying about traditional housewives, that is the thing. Like, and we know this, right? Our dog, if we have animals, they're following us around the house. Our children follow us around the house. Our husband saying, honey, where can I find this? What do I do with this? What, you're the center because you're the knowledge base. You carry the energy of your entire home.
Yes.
Everything revolves around the mother. You
Mhm.
are the creatress. You are everything. You are, and in my belief, the what brings God into the home. You are the human being that creates. You create human life, right? And you are so divinely connected. Make yourself a priority so that you can give even more to the people that you love in your life.
Mm. I appreciate that response so much, Miranda. I love your reframe of I need to be nourished before I can nourish others. And I think that that is so embodied and so evident in the creation of a human being, right? Like a malnourished mother cannot create life. right? And I love how you brought in even that sacred aspect of like, you're right, like we are the ones who turned, the love between ourselves and our husbands into a family, right? Like we brought these children into the world and turned this house into a home. And I don't want to be misunderstood in that I don't think that that is absolutely sacred and the most important thing that I do. I think we both agree that the most important roles that we play in our lives are that of a wife and mother, right? And the creation of the home. With that being said, how are we showing up for our children? How are we showing up for our husbands and our community? Are we showing up nourished or are we showing up empty? Right? And I think for a lot of us, we know what it was like to be parented by a mother who was showing up nourished versus a mother who was showing up empty, right? And we know the difference. We know how that feels. And I'm just so grateful to you, Miranda, for the work that you're doing. It's so it's about postpartum, but it just it lays the foundation for motherhood, which reverberates throughout every aspect of our lives. As we've seen throughout this conversation, we've gone on so many bunny trails. So, Miranda, how can my audience find you? I'm going to link Reclaiming Postpartum Wellness, this beautiful, full color, amazing book. And it's so gorgeous. It's so perfect it's an easy, simple read for any woman who's a mother or is going to be a mother. But how else can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Thank you so much for this, Janelle. This has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we can sit here and chat for hours at length, even more. There's so much more to say about everything here. So thank you for all of that. And if for those of you listening in who want more information, you can go find my podcast. That's a really great place to connect. If you love listening here on YouTube, I don't have videos, but I have audio. You can go tune it into my podcast, Postpartum University. And you can go to our website, postpartumu.com, and you can find us there and tune in.
Thank you so much, Miranda. That'll all be linked below. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.